Good morning. My name is Maurice Crespi, Managing Partner of Schindler's Attorneys. Schindler's Attorneys is a co-founder of COBRA. COBRA was formed by IQ Business, Schindler's Attorneys, and Engaged Business Turnaround. And it was formed with a view to providing services, professional services to businesses on a shared value basis or on a gifted value basis. What that means is if you require assistance with from one of our partners, we have over 65 now, they'll provide it on a gifted basis if you cannot afford, otherwise on a shared value basis, where we ensure that value is always received in relation to the services, even in circumstances such as the present. So please, have a look at our website, www.cobra.org.za. You'll find a knowledge base which deals with all the regulations and all the rules, and it's updated on a regular basis. So we're told it's actually the most reliable database in the country at the moment. So as part of COBRA, we provide these webinars, and today we have an extremely exciting webinar with Cas Coovadia, who is going to be looking at what we're going to be discussing is the question of business unity and the implications of the current state of affairs, the COVID crisis on the South African economy, but importantly, what are we to do about it? And the question of business unity is obviously an important one in this time of crisis. He is the CEO of Business Unity South Africa, BUSA, and the former managing director of the Banking Association of South Africa. He is the chairperson of the National Business Initiative. He serves on the board of the Center for Development and Enterprise. He is the immediate past president of the International Banking Federation. He serves as a council member of the University of Witwatersrand. He's also on the board of the NEPAD Business Foundation. He also serves on the steering committee of the CEO initiative. Cas obtained his BCom from the University of College, Durban in 1971. He completed the housing finance course at the Wharton Real Estate Center at the University of Pennsylvania. He's also completed the Effective Directors Program with the Kagiso School of Leadership. He's contributed to numerous articles and publications on housing finance, civil society, legal government, and the role of civil organizations in governance. So we're really lucky, and we're truly spoiled to have Cas join us today. Before we move over to Cas, I'd like to also introduce the remaining panelists who've joined us today. We have Emma Marseille from IQ Business, Ian Fleming, who's the CEO of Engaged Business Turnaround, one of the founding partners, Gary Berkowitz from Schindler's Attorneys, Paul Michael Keichel from Schindler's Attorneys, Peter Gordon, also from Engaged Business Turnaround, and Renee Klopper from IQ Business. So before I hand over to Cas, I'd like to jump in and just outline what BUSA, their position in relation to government, their engagement with government, and then we can take it from there. So their position as at June was as follows. BUSA is of the view that the COVID-19 pandemic has caused a significant upheaval in the economy and in SA. The South African economy is particularly impacted because we were in a recession and a severe fiscal crisis before the impact of the pandemic. Real GDP grew at an estimated 0.7% in 2019. The fiscal deficit was an estimated 4.3% for that year. The economy was further battered by Moody's, the only major rating agency that rated us as an investment grade, downgrading the sovereign to sub-investment grade during COVID-19 crisis. So work done by Business for South Africa estimates a drop in South Africa GDP between 8.8% to 16.1% in 2020. Unemployment could range between 33.1% to more than 43.9%, And the South African Reserve Bank estimates our fiscal deficit could be over 10% of GDP. The economic impact of COVID-19 is thus severe, and this is exacerbated by the social impact because of the pandemic and the economic lockdown. The pandemic has also made starker the inequalities of our country, and it'll be extremely difficult in the COVID-19 and the COVID-19 to build our economy, and it's imperative that it's done so in a structured manner with structural reforms. There has been criticism by BUSA in relation to the government's handling of the situation, and the criticism is really that there's a resurface of the old ideology, and that's in relation to the ANC document and dogma, and significantly increases the role of the economy for the state, and they're interfering with the mandate and the independence of the Reserve Bank. So Cas, I'm going to ask you, just in relation to what I've just read out, have things changed? Where are we at the moment? So in relation to the outlook, the June outlook, in relation to the current state of affairs.
Thanks a lot, Maurice, and thank you for the opportunity. I think things have changed to the extent that we're making slow progress since the June scenario. So let me just take colleagues through what's happened. We, on the 2nd of July, presented our economic recovery strategy to the President and ministers in the economic cluster. We took them through the figures, but what we impressed upon them was that we are in a situation of severe crisis, both economically and socially, given the impact of COVID. And we need to move with extreme urgency to begin to firstly implement what can be implemented without any policy changes and so on. And those are issues like issuing an RFP for the next tranche of renewables, sorting out the spectrum issue, sorting out the Durban port and ensuring that that works properly. Just a number of stuff that can be done immediately. It just needs implementation. It needs the political will, but also to then start unpacking an economic recovery strategy post-COVID. We suggested that we can't do that in meetings of 30, 40, 50 people. We also suggested that it's something that needs to be done collaboratively between certainly government, business, and labor, and also community groups that participate in NEDLAC. And that we suggested we put together some sort of economic restructuring team, a small team. The President heard us, said we'll come back. Not too much happened until last week, Thursday, where there was a meeting at NEDLAC between the President, number of his ministers, and the critical stakeholders. And we agreed as business at the caucus before that we want only one thing from that meeting, and that is the small team to start working on this. And we got that. So we are going to be putting together now a small team with representatives from labor, government, business, and community. That team will look at different documents around the table. So there's a business document. Government presented a document last week, Thursday. Labor and community put their ideas on the economy on the table last week, Thursday. There's the ANC document. To unpack those documents, to identify areas of convergence and see how we can move quickly on those. And then to try and negotiate, see where we can find compromise and trade-offs to minimize the differences. And within a month or so to present to the President an economic recovery strategy for South Africa. So that's where we are now. So it's some movement. It's an agreement that we need a small team. We're actually meeting this afternoon at NEDLAC to look at the structure, to look at the size of the team and so on, so that we can get this thing going next week. So from that point of view, there's some movement in the process, but we need to now continue to put our shoulders to the wheel and impress upon other stakeholders that we need to move with urgency and within the context of an understanding that we're in crisis. So let me stop there.
Great. Just to our Facebook audience and to our attendees, please ask questions on Facebook. You can post the questions in the comment section and I'll pick them up. You mentioned Labour, Cas, and the document was presented by Labour. Now, just to reflect on an interview you gave, a question was posed to you as to why Labour's got more clout, and you gave the obvious answer. That's because they can strike and they can protest. So they have that muscle, which you correctly point out business does not have. So importantly, how aligned is the Labour document or the proposals with what you guys are proposing? Because they're pretty much aligned. That's good news for us.
Look, I think Labour does agree that we're in crisis, agrees that we need to move with urgency. Labour is obviously seized with the unemployment situation and that we need to create jobs, and that any economic recovery needs to be inclusive, needs to be job creating. So we agree with all of those broadly. We've agreed that COVID has made stark a number of issues, and one of those is the inequalities and inequities in our society, and any economic growth strategy needs to take that into account, simply because if we don't bring into the economy, and if the majority of the people in our country don't have a stake in that economy, we're not going to achieve the growth rates we need, let alone sustain them. So we agree broadly. I think obviously we're going to, when we sit down in the small team, we're going to have to look at in more detail issues like labor market reform, issues like just ideologically the type of economy we're talking about and so on. But I think that everybody, I think all constituencies in this period are hurting to the extent that all constituencies appreciate that they need to sit down and make compromises and trade-offs along the way. So, the rubber really hits the road now as we go into the detail, but certainly at a broad level, there is agreement that we need to move with urgency. We're in a situation of crisis. We need to do what we need to do to retain and create jobs, but then it also goes into issues of competitiveness, issues of ease of doing business, issues of some of the labor market reform issues that are necessary and so on. And all of those, I guess, will surface as we get into more substantive engagement on the documents.
I read BUSA's proposal, and I think it was titled something along the lines "Future of Work." And what one gleans from that is that you guys are pretty aligned when it comes to policy with Labour. Am I correct in saying that, or has that changed?
Yeah, no, we align with policy, and we also align with Labour on the fact that we need implementation. We need urgent implementation from government, and government needs to be capacitated to do that urgent implementation. So the capacity of the state and the role of the state is critical, and there are areas of that in which we agree with Labour.
But I'm going to jump into questions so we make sure that we get through them all. Angus has asked, as an entrepreneur, South Africa is still struggling to get funding right. We need more industrialists, but you have institutions like the IDC turning down black industrialists. Companies with approved grants from the DTI are being turned down by the NEF and the IDC. Is this being addressed by you guys?
Well, we haven't specifically started addressing how these government-funded institutions are performing, with the exception of obviously some of the major SOEs that have been in the news. But I think that one of the things in our document looks at the whole issue about funding and the sorts of funding that would be needed. And as part of that discussion, I think we will have to, once we get into the details, go into whether we are effectively utilizing funds that are provided to institutions that are supposed to be promoting industrialization, promoting small business, promoting localization in the country and so on, and whether they are fit for purpose, whether they are utilizing those funds properly, and whether they are accounting for those funds properly. So I think that as we get into the detail, we're going to have to look at the potential funding sources for economic growth and recovery in different areas of the economy, whether they are fit for purpose and whether they need to be repurposed to actually provide the support that is necessary. But at this stage, I mean, we just haven't had the opportunity to substantively go into the details because it's only now that we've agreed on a multi-stakeholder small team. At this stage, it's been at a fairly broad level just to put on the table our broad thinking on economic recovery and then agree a process for the substantive engagement. And that's only going to start now.
See, Peter's got a question. Before I move over to Peter, one of our panelists from Engage, we have a poll, which is interesting, and it relates to the last comment made by Cas. So let's have a look. Let's see, what do you think the government's primary focus should be to aid economic recovery? And we have, for the benefit of the Facebook audience, the following options: skills and education, infrastructure investment, energy security, i.e. fixing Eskom, stimulate the local manufacturing industries and SMMEs, or investment in technology. So I'm launching the poll now. Please make a point of voting. I think this will be very, very interesting. So go for it. You can start voting now. Okay, get in there. Please put in your final votes. We've got votes coming through. They should prove this is very interesting. Okay, I'm ending the poll. So here are the results. What I find interesting here, Cas, is that investment in technology is sitting at 4%. Now, I would have imagined regard being had that, I mean, internationally, big data or data is regarded as the most valuable commodity that exists. Now, surely that's a resource that we should be intellectually mining for want of a better phrase. Yet it's regarded as the least most important. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so let me reveal. I voted for that.
Okay.
So and I think it's indicative of where our economy is. I think that we, in our document, we're saying that one of the biggest challenges is to actually move from the way our economy is structured to more digitalization, to more technology, to more innovation. And I don't think we've done enough on that. And it's interesting that it's not top of mind even amongst people on this seminar. And I think that we are going to have to make that shift if we want to be competitive, if we want to you know, and post-COVID, I think that most countries or a lot of countries are actually going to look at how they can leverage off 4IR and digitalization and more technology-based economy. And these are, I mean, just yesterday, I was in a meeting with some people from COBRA on a team we put together on digitalization. And the point was made that it's not whether it happens, it's happening and it will continue to grow. And any economy that does not actually gear itself for that, I think, will be left behind. So it's a mindset shift I think we need in our country, and I think it's needed across all stakeholders.
I point out, you know, if South Africa were to build a unicorn like a Facebook or a Twitter or one of those companies, a Google, the value of those companies, if they were in SOE, we now have a value of hovering around $2 trillion, which would mean that if one of those companies were sold, a single company were sold, we would not have to pay tax for about a decade. I mean, that's the value that we're talking about. And that is honestly where the commodity lies in the fourth industrial revolution. And that's what should be mined. So I agree wholeheartedly with you on that. Peter, you had a question.
Yes, Maurice, thanks. Casio, well, I'll combine two. I mean, notwithstanding the sensitivity of this subject, in the discussions with government, has there been any indication thus far that they are not averse to reducing the cost of government employees? I mean, we're sitting at around 14% of GDP. Close to 40% of all our expenditure goes on the wage bill. So is there any move, do you think, in government to try and reduce the cost of its employment? Notwithstanding it's a horrible time to even be considering it, but going forward.
Look, I think, again, that's something that we've certainly presented as a critical issue, that government expenditure, public expenditure needs to be reduced. Obviously, the wage bill is a critical element of that. I think there is an understanding among some people in government, and I think one of the points I'd like to make is that we can't talk about government as a monolith. I think there are some, even in the cabinet, who would have ideologically different views. There are others who would have the view that state expenditure needs to actually be controlled and reduced. So I'm not convinced that there's a singular view on this in government. But I think that there is an increasing view, I think, among some of the critical people in that cabinet, that we do need to control state expenditure, and we're going to have to face this elephant in the room. Obviously, this is going to be a critical issue when we start substantively engaging on the economic recovery strategy. And at some point in time, government is going to have to bite the bullet and make a call on this. But I think there are people in cabinet who understand this and who believe it needs to be addressed. But I'm not convinced that it's, that there's a criticality of people in there at the moment who can drive this to the extent it needs to be driven. But it's an issue that we certainly going to keep top of agenda, and I think that in these substantive discussions, if people are pushing that this is not the route to go, then I think they're going to have to present alternatives on how we deal with our fiscal situation in particular. And I don't think there are any, to be quite honest.
Thanks, guys. And just to, the next point was on privatization. Has there been any, I mean, if we look at where Denel is at the moment, we think of the malaise that SAA is in. Is there any talk at all of pushing the privatization route on the SOEs?
Well, I think there is an increasing awareness that we can't continue as we have been with the SOEs. I think there is an increasing awareness, even in the SAA debate, although I just can't understand the concentration on SAA still. But even in that debate, there is an awareness that private equity partners would be necessary if there's any hope of doing anything, although I don't think there is. But I think there is an increasing awareness that we can't continue with SOE draining the economy as they are, and we can't continue with the ideological view that SOEs cannot have some sort of private sector participation. I was on a panel with Ino Godongwana at a progressive business forum thing during the week, and Enoch was quite clear that while there might have been resolutions at the ANC's National General Council last year, that things have changed and one needs to work within the context of the real situation now. And we need to be realistic about how we actually do things. So I think that there is an increasing awareness on that, yes.
I see another one of our panelists, Ian, has another question. Before I get to you, Ian, there's a question by an attendee that I'd like to ask. Funding has always been a major stumbling block, and comparing our funding models with the first world, we are way behind. For example, IDC spent less than 50%, only 43% of their funding on black industrialists, yet they turn us away. Simply put, if funding does not receive priority, we are doomed. Does your organization have the mandate to address this?
Yeah, funding generally is, we have about 3 or 4 slides in our deck on funding. Not just funding of businesses and funding of business activity and the economy as such, but also from the fiscal side, the fiscal situation we are in. So we are saying that we're going to need over the next 3 years about 3.4 trillion rand to actually, and 2.4 trillion rand of that is in the state. Do we have the mandate to address this? Our document talks to this, identifies it as a critical issue. That document is mandated by our members. So yes, we have a mandate to address this. Again, when we get into the substantive discussion and we talk about the role of the state, we need to actually, certainly our view is that the state should be playing more of a facilitative role than an interventionist role. And one needs to question whether it would be more efficient for the private sector to actually fund businesses and fund economic activity rather than the IDCs of this world, the NEFs of this world, and so on, with some sort of facilitation from the state. But then in that discussion, I think we also need to have a frank discussion on whether the private financial sector currently is geared to do that sufficiently well enough. We concentrate significantly on developing and growing small and medium enterprises as part of this growth trajectory. And we need to ask whether, for instance, we have a sufficiently deep venture capital market for small, medium enterprises in our country. And if not, what do we need to do about that? So I think that ideally, we should be pushing for as much of this funding to be done by and managed by the private sector with facilitation from the state. But we need to then have the frank discussion whether we, as a private sector, finance sector, we are geared to do that.
Great. Jan, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Maurice, and thank you, Cas. My question is that there seems to be a general theme of almost having to impose political will or to force political will on government. How do you think it would play out if the likes of BUSA were simply just to sit back and just let government do it their way?
Well, I think the result of that will be pretty bad. And you know, we've taken the view here that despite the frustrating process we've been through and at times continue to go through, and I think I said that in that interview in the Sunday Times, that I don't think we have too many choices here. I think that we're certainly coming at this within the context of building this country and ensuring that we are successful. And to do that, we need a capable state. We absolutely clear business alone can't do it. And if business just sits back and says, well, let things happen, let government do its thing and let things happen, I think that's the results of that would be bad. I don't think, certainly we don't think that's the route to go in BUSA. We're not pretending that this is an easy road. We're not pretending that even if we reach agreement among stakeholders on some of the critical issues, that it's going to be an easy road. We're going to be on a long, hard road to recovery. But I think we've got to give this a go. We've got to give a multi-stakeholder effort a go. I think there are sufficient people in each of the stakeholders that appreciate that we need to work together to take the hard decisions. And I think we've got to give that a go before we even consider a sort of approach that says, well, government, you want to do things your way, go ahead and we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question here from Bob. In the spirit of shared value, how do we go about getting the private sector more involved in assisting government to successfully implement the economic recovery strategy?
So, I mean, let me use COVID period as an example, because I think that question is often asked in a way that sort of says, well, the private sector isn't actually participating and helping government in economic recovery. So let's look at the management of the impact of COVID. So we have at NEDLAC, a rapid response task team that meets for 3 hours once a week on every Tuesday morning, made up of government, labor, business, and community groups. Business has come to the party in helping government distribute UIF and other grants that need to be distributed. We've come to the party in helping with some of the tracking and tracing stuff. We've come to the party in looking at behavioral change and how we actually promote that. Business has, with government, put together the Solidarity Fund. In the early stages of COVID, the Solidarity Fund, primarily with business money, funded close to R1 billion worth of PPE that we had to bring in quickly and compete for globally. In the Business for South Africa platform that led to this document, and we continue to work on this, we have probably 250 volunteers on a pro bono basis, from management consultants, legal firms, communication agencies, CEOs of corporates that are giving their time, retired CEOs that we pull back in. So there's been a phenomenal effort by business during the COVID period to actually work with government and other stakeholders to bring business expertise, capacity, and resources to bear. And we have consistently put on the table that business is willing and able to bring resources to bear to assist government in economic recovery. But there's got to be a receptivity on the part of government to accept that sort of capacity and assistance. We've put together through the National Business Initiative something called TEMDEV, which COBRA is aware of, which has retired senior people that are willing to actually go into municipalities and help municipalities sort some of their issues out. So I think business is coming to the party, and is coming to the party in the national interest. Can we do more? Of course we can do more, but I think that the platform has been laid, and Business for South Africa has been, I think, a tremendous platform in that way, where people have voluntarily and pro bono come to the party. Some people have now gone back to their day jobs, but a lot of people are still saying, oh, look, we still want to help. Where can we help? We getting people every day asking where they can help. So I think that business is doing a lot. I think we can structure this more effectively, and B4SA has given us the opportunity to do that. But I think that we need to ensure that we direct those resources and that capacity in conjunction with government to the right areas and within the context of an agreed understanding with government on what its role should be in promoting economic growth. And I think that that's a hard discussion we need to have.
Yeah, thanks for that. You've had a lot to say around corruption, and we all have. A recent letter went out by Nedbank, and they made the point that one must distinguish between the political party, the ANC, and government. And what they do is they highlight what government has in fact done, what Cyril has done when it comes to corruption. And it is in fact quite impressive. And they also justify why there was there have been delays, and the delays are, well, the NPA want to get it right. Do you share those sentiments?
Look, I think the president, since his appointment, has done quite a lot to tackle corruption. I mean, the damage that was caused to institutions as a result of corruption, as a result of hollowing out of the institutions, he did a tremendous amount of work. So where SARS is today compared to where it was under the Zuma period, where the NPA is, where the Hawks are, undoubtedly a lot of work being done there. The Zondo Commission continues to reveal massive corruption, and that is good. So absolutely, I think a lot has been done, and the only point I have made is that, and the Shamila Batohi at the NPA has indicated that they need the capacity. So I agree that they must make sure that the cases are tight, so that by the time they go to court, they have a pretty good chance of a successful prosecution. But at the same time, I think the longer and the sort of nature of these corrupt activities are such that the longer it takes to get watertight cases in place, I think the more difficult it becomes to actually go for the real people that are involved in the corruption. And I think that the only issue I have is that we need to identify this as probably one of the most critical issues at which we need to throw resources. And so, if there's a debate about money going into some SOE that has neither economic nor social benefit to the country, as against money going into the NPA to increase its capacity, but do so more quickly with additional capacity. I don't think it's a debate. I think the money should be going to the NPA. And that I think is what's missing. And I think that would be my view on this. The other thing is, I think that I agree we need to separate the party from government, but I think that in the South African context, the dominance of the ANC as a political party and the impact it has, because the vast majority of government comes from the ANC. The impact it has on governance is an important issue. And so that's why we've certainly been calling that if we truly going to have a separation between the party and government, then I think that where there are any impact on government because of what's happening in the party, the president needs to rise above that and lead us as president of this country. And that's what we've been calling for. But I agree that a lot has been done on corruption. But I think in identifying areas where limited state resources should be used, let's direct those resources towards fighting the corruption rather than into areas that have no social or economic impact.
I think this will be an opportune time to launch our second poll, again for the Facebook audience. The poll is, what do you think are the biggest challenges government face in stimulating economic recovery? An inability to implement and execute plans, or corruption, or legislation, or poor collaboration between the private and public sectors. So here we go. The poll has been launched. Please vote. There we go. Corruption's in the lead. An inability to implement and execute plans, close second. Legislation, we don't have anything as yet. We've got a dead heat now between inability to implement and execute plans and corruption. Still a dead heat. We've got 0 on legislation. 13% on poor collaboration between the private and public sector. So here we go. So it's a dead heat between corruption and inability to implement and execute plans. But I guess the two are pretty much tied, aren't they, Cas? I mean, because of corruption, that gives rise to an inability to implement and execute plans.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah, something that needs to urgently be addressed. Hopefully it is. I do know from a very, very, very reliable source that Cyril has quite a difficult balancing act within the party that he needs to contend with. And that is in fact stifling his ability to do what he needs to do. Over to you, Ian. You had a question?
Thank you, Maurice. Cas, the use of pension fund money as a contributor to the economic recovery strategy has obviously been met by extreme skepticism from most circles. Is there any way this can actually be done responsibly, given government's perceived poor track record with management of funds and assets? And if so, what needs to happen before this takes place?
Look, again, let me just go back to the panel I chaired with Enoch Godongwana, amongst others, earlier in the week, and this question was raised. And Enoch's response was that, again, this was a decision taken at the ANC NGC, but he said that we need to understand what we're talking about here in the current context. So he's saying, certainly, from what he said, that there is no intention it's not a prescribed assets debate. In many countries, pension fund monies are used for investment in infrastructure and other areas. That what they are saying is that they want to create an environment where there is the possibility for trustees of pension funds to actually direct monies to pension fund monies to a greater extent than they are able to do now, to direct pension fund monies to infrastructure development and so on, but to do so in a responsible way with trustees acting responsibly. And it's certainly not their intention to force pension fund monies irresponsibly into areas where there would not be a return and there would not be growth in for pensioners. So that's his view. I took the view that we have nothing, no problem in principle with pension fund monies being used, being invested in infrastructure and so on, but trustees or pension funds have a fiduciary responsibility. They must exercise that responsibility. They must take those decisions, and they must have the wherewithal to that if an investment does not have the potential of a return or a good return or profit for that pension fund on behalf of pensioners, they must not be forced to actually put that money in there. So he seemed to be agreeing with that. And now, obviously, the proof is in the pudding, but certainly from what Enoch said, it is not prescribed asset. It is not forcing pension funds to actually invest pensioners' money in unviable or anything else, but it's possibly to increase the percentage that pension funds could actually invest in infrastructure and so on, but still to do so responsibly. So we certainly, when we get into substantive discussion, we will certainly want to talk to that and hello.
Unfortunately, it appears that we have a drop in line, Cas. Your internet seems to be. There we go. You're back, Cas. We missed all of that. Your internet dropped. So.
Did it?
I think we only missed the last 20 seconds or so.
The last 20 seconds.
Sorry, it didn't appear to drop on my side, so I thought I was live. So.
Okay.
Okay, I hope you got that. Enoch certainly of the view that this isn't prescribed assets. He agreed that there shouldn't be anything that forces trustees of pension funds to invest in infrastructure projects or anything else that does not have a good return on behalf of trustees. I think what he said is that their idea of change of regulation is to increase the percentage of funds that could be invested in infrastructure projects and so on, but not to force trustees of pension funds to make irresponsible decisions that ultimately the decision is in the hands of those trustees, and they will not force pension funds to actually invest in areas where there are not appropriate returns as trustees decide they should be. And certainly in the substantive discussions, we will certainly hold him to that.
We have a question from Angus. Is accountability not a major problem as well? I'd just like to add to that, because where we talk of accountability, and this relates to the corruption, the two forms of accountability: accountability in government, and then accountability in the party. Now, I'd put it to you, and I'd like you to comment on the question, but also I am of the view that accountability in the party is in fact more important. What do you have to say to that and to the attendees' question?
Well, I would think both are important, because, you know, if you don't have accountability in the party, and if the party conducts itself, and be it the ANC or anybody else, conducts itself in a way that does not hold its members accountable for a whole range of issues, be it corruption or other issues, then that seeps into, and particularly when it's a majority party, that seeps into government. And it actually then creates a culture in government that if the party does not have sufficient accountability and structure for accountability, then that's okay in government, because it's senior people in the party who would be sitting in government. So I think it's in both. But the thing is, and if we're talking about the separation between party and government, then government has a particular responsibility, because while you are there at the behest of your party, because you're from the majority party, as a government, your accountability is not to the party. Your accountability is to the electorate, not only those who elected you, but to this country. And it's a very different type of accountability. It's an accountability for utilization of taxpayers' money, as against in the party an accountability for utilization of wherever they get the money from. It's an accountability to citizens of this country, because you represent citizens of this country. So it's a very different type of accountability. So it's in both, but I think that accountability in government is, in my view, extremely important, and it's a very different form of accountability, and that's why we've got to keep the fires under the feet of government continuously, as far as that is concerned. And let me just make one final point on that. I think the position we've also taken on the corruption side and accountability side is that as business organizations and as businesses, we also need to hold them around to ourselves, because certainly we're pushing that if businesses are found to be involved in corrupt practices, as responsible business organizations and as ethical, I hope, business organizations, we need to call those businesses out, and we should be able to take action against those businesses in some form or other. Because it can't be, we can't, with hands on heart, continuously hold government to account and ask them to account if the other side of the corruption, we are not prepared to actually be pretty clear and pretty robust about that.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that sentiment. I have another question here. What do you believe the appropriate response by government ought to be if we experience a surge? And I'd like to add to that, if we experience a surge where we're not sure what the impact will be on the healthcare system, so that's scenario A. And scenario B would be, what do you believe government's response should be if there's a surge and it hits the threshold and starts paralyzing our healthcare system? What, in those circumstances, should government do?
Yeah, look, I'm not, I have, not only am I not an expert, I'm not an expert on anything, but I don't have sufficient knowledge from a health point of view on what the response should be. I mean, I think they should listen to the people with the expertise and knowledge on that. I think that if there is a surge, I think Professor Karim indicated that there will be a surge, not only because the economy has been opened up, but because we we continue to increase our testing. We continue to pick cases up. So we need to understand why there is a surge. I think that if there's significant impact on the health system and the health system is unable to actually manage the impact of the surge, I think the decisions need to be based on science. So the response to that has to be based on science. I think that we also then need to draw in the private sector, and the private sector needs to actually put its hand up at that time to see how we can actually assist in alleviating the pressure on the health system. I think to reverse the opening of the economy as a result of a surge needs to be very, very carefully considered. I think that the economic impact of that and the social impact of that will be severe, because already we've had difficulties in extending the time frames for government to actually assist people not in employment and so on. That will exacerbate even further. And I think the economic impact will be severe because it creates a lot of uncertainty. It stops in its tracks all attempts to now begin to pick the economy up under other level 2. So I think, look, this is, I certainly don't feel comfortable in making any taking any definitive view on this, except to say that I think the first port of call has got to be to understand why the surge. Listen to the experts on that, see what the experts are saying, and then not just unilaterally respond, but at least sit down with business and labor and say, look, this is the situation. What are the options here? And let's try to work through that together.
We're almost out of time, so I'm going to roll 2 questions up into one. 2 questions by attendees. One is anonymous, the other one is Angus. Thanks so much for your questions, Angus. What are some things that we should do right now to create an environment that is more conducive to encouraging entrepreneurship and sustain small businesses? Which follows in the second question, which is tied into that. What can I do to assist in turning this ship, the economy around, and contribute to the change we need to serve all in South Africa? Well, the first is certainly report corruption, but over to you, Cas.
Yeah, and look, I think, we sometimes think that we can only make a contribution if we involved in these so-called important discussions and debates and engagements at senior levels and so on. I think there are some of us who are involved in that and need to continue doing that. But I think that each one of us just do the best we can in the areas in which we work, in the areas in which we operate. So the first is, if you're in a corporate, ask yourselves what the corporate is doing to promote SMEs in its value chain and what more can be done. It's often simple stuff. We've been pushing and we're going to advocate even more strongly just a simple thing that we've been talking about for years, just pay SMEs in 30 days so that the cash flow isn't impacted so badly. So I think we just need to frankly ask ourselves, okay, we are involved in a particular area of activity. We're doing okay. Ask ourselves, if one of the issues in this country is the growth and development of SMEs, in the area I'm working, are we doing enough on that? Without too much of an effort and too many changes, are we able to do a bit more? If we are able to do a bit more, just do it. Reporting corruption, absolutely. And then I think that just, look for, so these sorts of discussions. I had an interaction with PwC non-executive directors yesterday. And again, just to say that we're trying to, through Business for South Africa and elsewhere, trying to offer a structure and an infrastructure for people to put up their hands and say, look, this is my expertise, this is my interest. So yesterday I got a call from somebody who makes furniture in this country, used to import it from China, now makes it here. Thinks that there's tremendous scope for local manufacturing in this country. Just a businessman who's making furniture. We've got a team we're putting together at BUSA on localization and how we jack up localization. I told him, I'm going to put you in that team. Because he phoned me, he said, how can I help? I said, you've got experience, you're passionate about it. Well, I'll put you in that team, work in that, and put your experience and your passion to bear. And it's as simple as that. And so what I would encourage is just, COBRA does that. And if B4SA can work with COBRA in doing that, just put your hand up. This is my expertise. This is the area I'm interested in. Can I be used? And I can tell you, you can be used.
Yeah, and I'd just like to mention that, you know, we want partners. So if you want to assist and you want to give back, please come to us, approach COBRA, and become a COBRA partner, and you can provide your services on a shared value and gifted value basis, which is what we need right now. So we're out of time. Thanks so much, Cas.
Thank you. Thanks.
And thank you to my attendees. That was fantastic. Please go to COBRA for further webinars. You'll see I've put on the screen, there's a further webinar next Thursday, which will also be good. It's joint business coach and philanthropist Jacques Velleman as he guides business towards delivering results that matter. So please join us for that next Thursday. Until then, thanks so much again. We're really, really indebted to you, Cas. We're going to get you back. I see some of the attendees have said they want you back on this COBRA webinar once a month. So
yeah, our most people in our country should be institutionalized if they want people like me back. But great, thanks. It's been a great interaction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cas.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.